News 2 presents To The Point.
Welcome to The Point, the show where we break down the political issues and elections that matter to you from across the Lowcountry, here in South Carolina and the entire nation. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Riley Benson. It was a very exciting week here at the News 2 studios. The only debate between the candidates for South Carolina's 1st Congressional District was right here in the News 2 studios on Wednesday night. Now, I had a chance to hear from both Representative Nancy Mace and Dr. Annie Andrews in the minutes after that debate. Here's what Representative Mace had to say.
I've been very strong. I've said I would not support any bill that would ban abortion without exceptions. I've actually talked to Senator Graham about his bill and some of the issues, the heartburn that I have over the details in that particular piece of legislation, but I have not ever voted or sponsored a bill that would ban abortion without exceptions. That's just simply not the case at all, and I would not.
If you wouldn't mind just going ahead and kind of expanding on what you were saying there in that point.
Well, my opponent says I supported a measure that would be a national ban on abortion with no exceptions, and that's just a flat-out lie. And so you have to combat it with the truth. I've always supported women who are victims of rape, girls who are victims of incest, because I too am a rape victim. I would never in my wildest dreams ever support a bill that didn't have protections for women who've been raped. And that was my message tonight. It's not okay. We know politicians lie all the time, but it doesn't mean that it's okay, especially on this particular issue that's so sensitive and so personal to me. I was raped as a teenager. I fought tooth and nail for women who've been raped.
You know, Representative Mace, we're about 15 minutes removed from tonight's debate, so obviously I'm sure you're still processing, but my question is, how do you think you did tonight? How do you think the debate went?
I think it went well. I wish we had more time. 60 seconds, it's really hard to answer a question about inflation in 60 seconds when you really need a full hour to dive into the details of how we claw our way out of this. And so I wish we had more time together, but I certainly had a good time and had some fun while I was at it.
Obviously I think tonight we got a chance to see stances from both of you, maybe some for the first time that we haven't heard from either Dr. Andrews or yourself. So I want to ask you the question, in your opinion, what were some of the biggest differences you could see between yourself and Dr. Andrews tonight?
Well, the policies that will keep our community safe. If you look at, she supports open borders. She's supported a group that wants to defund the police and defund the Border Patrol, defund ICE, defund Homeland Security. Those things don't keep our communities safe. Those are the biggest differences between us. The other thing is, she supported, in March of last year, sex change surgery on minor children. That's something she actually advocated for on her Twitter feed. And so then to deny that, I think that's child abuse and something that she should be held to task for, held to account for.
At points tonight, there was times where each of you may have called the other one liars or saying that things were lies. So, I want to ask you, where can voters go that they can fact check the information that was talked about tonight?
NancyMace.org. We have a fact check page with links and photos to everything that we stated tonight, and also combating the lies stated by my opponent.
And I want to ask you, how's your confidence coming out of tonight's debate? Obviously, we're just weeks from Election Day, so how do you feel about your chances?
I'm cautiously optimistic. As one friend told me, the best way to win is to run unopposed or run scared. And so I'm always working hard, working around the clock. We're up by double digits right now, and I want to keep it there. Obviously,
like we mentioned, I think 2 weeks at this point, so maybe 3. What is your message to voters as we're really in that closing period right now?
I worked hard in 2020. I promised to be an independent voice. I've made good on that promise. That promise has come at a huge price to me personally and politically. And I'm willing to take those arrows. I'm willing to take those attacks if it means doing the right thing for the Lowcountry.
Representative Mace, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you joining us.
Riley.
John Brasini joining me now. John, obviously you were with us on debate night. It was a big night here in the News 2 studios. We hear from Representative Mace. We heard a number of topics. We talk about the economy. We talk about abortion. We talk about infrastructure. So many things. I guess your takeaways from the representative, we know her record, but maybe did you learn something new, or is there anything that voters should have cling to?
So Representative Mace last night, she certainly did what she needed to do, and that was to shore up or secure the Republican base. It's the 1st Congressional District is not bright red. It might be perhaps maybe more of a purple, for example, which is why her position on a lot of the issues in comparison to maybe more mainstream Republicans might be a little bit more moderate. There is one highlight on abortion. We do see a distinct difference between her and Dr. Andrews. Representative Mace last night clarified her position that she does support abortion in the cases of rape, incest, fetal anomalies, and health of the mother. Whether that's truthful or not, or whether some of her statements have conflicted with that, voters can decide that based upon their own research. Just based on what she said last night, that is a distinction with regard to what Dr. Andrews believes.
You know, some of the other issues we talked about, legalizing marijuana, it's something that we got an interesting stance. These two candidates really kind of, in a sense, agree about this. I don't know if you want to kind of talk about that aspect as well.
So again, if there's room for bipartisanship in Congress, it might be really on medical marijuana from Representative Mace's perspective. She went as far as saying she actually agrees with some of the steps the Biden administration has taken. And to her position, as she articulated last night in the debate, it probably aligns more closely with what we saw that came out of the state Senate regarding medical marijuana that couldn't get through the House. In South Carolina, the House is a little more conservative than the Senate. Representative Mace seems to align more with a moderate position overall, and that may put her in a minority.
Don, obviously, we got to hear from Representative Mace. We want to also take a listen to what we had to hear from Dr. Andrews after that debate. On the topic of abortion at the point in the debate, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of build upon your response to Representative Mace there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. So what I was talking about there was H.R. 1011 that Nancy Mace co-sponsored 5 days before the Dobbs decision leaked. And this is the most extreme version of an abortion ban that exists. This bill is supported by all of the anti-abortion organizations, and Representative Mace is the only person on that bill who claims it's not an abortion bill. This bill defines life at the moment of fertilization. In effect, this bill would ban all abortion with no exceptions. It would also shut down the practice of IVF. She's trying to say her joining this bill is symbolic, or that the bill itself is symbolic, or that it's not about abortion. But as I said earlier, I don't know how stupid she thinks the women in this state are, but this is one of the top issues of this election. And my point is that we cannot trust what she says. We have to trust her votes. And her name on this bill is indefensible.
You know, Dr. Andrews, obviously we're just a few minutes removed from this debate, so I'm still sure you're still processing, but we want to ask you how you feel about your performance tonight and how the debate went.
Yeah, I mean, it's my first experience running for office, so it's my first experience doing a debate like this. I think it went really well. I am pleased that we covered a lot of the top issues of the day: abortion, gun violence, inflation, and I think it went great. I feel really good about it, and we have so much momentum behind our campaign. I'm really looking forward to folks starting to vote on Monday and can't wait for Election Day on November 8th.
Dr. Andrews, you'd say we went through a number of topics, and so I want to kind of ask you, in your thoughts, the biggest difference on a lot of these topics between you and Representative Mace, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so first I'll say the biggest difference between me and Representative Mace is that she is an aspiring career politician, and I am a pediatrician who just wants to go to Washington, D.C. to solve some problems. We couldn't be more different on our positions on abortion. I believe we need to have the protections we had under Roe, which is access to abortion up until the point of fetal viability. Her position is incredibly outside of the mainstream and incredibly extreme. On gun violence, I know that it is a public health crisis, and I have cared for far too many children who have been shot, and I will work diligently to pass common sense gun laws like expanded background checks, secure storage laws, and red flag laws that are supported by the vast majority of Americans. Nancy Mace has an NRA A+ rating, and she is more concerned about keeping that than she is about keeping our kids safe in schools. We have to get serious about climate change as well. And as I said earlier, she is a climate science denier, and she takes money from oil and gas companies, and that precludes her from getting serious about addressing climate change. So that is another issue on which we differ greatly.
You know, Dr. Andrews, I think at points in tonight's debate, Representative Mace called you a flat-out liar. So we want to ask you, where is the best place for voters to fact-check some of the information that was discussed tonight?
Well, so everything I have said about her voting record is available at nancysaysno.com. Folks can go there, look at all of the votes she has taken since she started representing us in Washington, D.C. with citations. I was not lying tonight. I promise to serve with honesty and integrity.
Dr. Andrews, just a couple weeks now from Election Day, any final thoughts for our voters here tonight before we close out?
Just that I think people are tired of typical career politicians who use mudslinging as a way to score votes, who throw vulnerable children under the bus to score votes. And I promise that, again, I will lead with honesty and integrity. My policy positions are based on data, facts, and science, not what I deem politically expedient for me in the moment. And it's just time for a new kind of leadership.
My last question, just overall, how confident are you in your chances after tonight's debate?
So I feel great about this. We have so much momentum behind our campaign. We outraised our opponent last quarter. My events are full of young, engaged voters, and I just feel really great about our chances in November.
Dr. Andrews, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
You know, John, for voters, this was maybe their first time to get to hear Dr. Andrews' stance on a lot of these issues that we discussed during this debate. Just kind of give us a synopsis overview of kind of your takeaway. I know you were here, you were feverishly writing notes, so kind of what your thoughts were on this debate.
So again, Dr. Andrews, somewhat Representative Mace, she did what she needed to do last night in the way of shoring up the Democratic base. I'm sure all Democrats were really proud of her performance last night. And her positions on the issues certainly align with a lot of the Democratic values. As far as what either candidate did to court independent or undecided voters, well, we don't know, and we won't know that until Election Day.
John, we asked about the strength points for Representative Mace. So what were the strengths for Dr. Andrews in this debate? Something that maybe stood out to you that voters maybe are going to cling to? So
certainly abortion emerging just as one of the key issues overall in the midterm elections. She did highlight her position. And that is that she would like to see us go back to a Roe-type state in the sense that the states could still provide some restrictions on abortion. Of course, she supports, abortion for rape, incest, life of the mother, so on and so forth. Abortion is an interesting issue in this race because of her background as a pediatrician. Again, we don't have any knowledge. Representative Mace has any medical training. So, again, that's probably going to give Dr. Andrews an advantage there because she can speak to the actual science.
John, obviously, Dr. Andrews is not a politician. She's never ran for office. She made that clear there. So, I guess your takeaway from someone who's never been in a position like this, it just kind of came out firing in a sense.
So, politics in and of itself is tough.
Right.
And anyone who is willing to step up and to step out to put themselves in a position deserves a pat on the back. And Representative Mace went as far as to congratulate Dr. Andrews and thank her for her willingness to get up and to stand out. Debates themselves, even for seasoned politicians, can be uncomfortable. Again, you don't control the narrative. Live television in itself is uncomfortable. You've got two moderators staring back at you. You're under a time limit, and you've got to try to say as much as you want to say within a concise time period. With all of that being said, I think that her debate performance last night overall was pretty solid, all factors considering. And she certainly does carry another political advantage, not having been previously elected, in the sense that she has no record to run on or to run off of. In the sense that that isn't the case, obviously, with Representative Mace.
John, something we're going to continue to follow closely here on To The Point as we inch closer to Election Day. Coming up later in the show, the battle over abortion legislation is playing center stage in Columbia. We'll tell you the latest and let you hear from both candidates in the gubernatorial race and their thoughts. At this point, we welcome in House Representative candidate Ellis Roberts. Ellis, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Riley, thank you so much for having me.
Obviously, we are just a couple weeks away from Election Day at this point, coming up in November. Talk to us about who you are as a person, why you're running for election, and what you want voters to know.
Well, my name is Ellis Roberts, and like you mentioned, I'm running for State House District 110. My wife and I live right here in Mount Pleasant off the foot of the bridge. We have 4 young boys, and we're concerned about the future of our state and where we're heading. I'm running because I'm tired of a lot of the divisive, extreme rhetoric that's come off really on both sides, but we've been hearing a lot of it, especially in Columbia. And somewhere along the way, that's given way to actually getting things done and moving the ball forward for our community. And so that's one of the main reasons why we're running, is to represent all of the voters here in District 110, which is Mount Pleasant, downtown, and James Island, and try to go to Columbia with a positive message.
Obviously, if you were elected, you would represent portions of Charleston County at the state level. What are some of your goals as a state of South Carolina you'd like to see accomplished if you were to be elected to this position?
I think as a state, again, I want to say that we've got to pull back on a lot of this extreme divisive rhetoric. One thing I think that we need to get past is we've got to protect people's freedoms, and that includes a woman's basic freedom to make medical decisions for herself. I want to see South Carolina get past this, and quickly. We are seeing a direct assault on a woman's right of choice, but it's also a direct assault on her right to make a personal decision for herself. And it doesn't have any place in our taking up our government and the current resources that it's doing right now. So I want to see that changed.
Like we've mentioned at this point, just a couple weeks from Election Day, specifically, what is your message to voters? Is there, deciding whether or not to get out to the ballot box, what do you want them to know? And obviously, you need to vote, or you encourage people to vote, but what do you want voters to know as they head to the ballot box?
That I am, and I've been this my whole life, a moderate Democrat. I've always called myself that. I've always believed in that. I don't necessarily believe that government has all the answers to everybody's problems. I don't believe in overspending. However, I do believe that there are roles of government that should be taken up and that we should be getting positive things done for the people.
Mr. Roberts, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Yep.
This has been great. I look forward, I hope to be back, but we are out there knocking on doors and campaigning every day, talking with voters. That's what's so key, and a key component to our campaign is we may not have all the answers, so it's important to talk with folks and hear what they have to say, hear their concerns, so we can take that message to Columbia.
Mr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining us here on To The Point. When we come back, we'll have more on local politics and elections. Stick with us. We'll be right back. The lawsuit challenging South Carolina's 6-week abortion ban has had its day in court. The state Supreme Court met this week to hear arguments in Planned Parenthood versus South Carolina. Our Jason Raven has more from Columbia.
Justices listened to about 2.5 hours of arguments from attorneys representing abortion providers here in South Carolina and the state. Now, the main question they've been asked to figure out is whether or not the right to privacy added to the state constitution by voters in the 1970s extends to a woman's right to an abortion here in South Carolina.
Right now, the state's 6-week abortion ban, also known as the Fetal Heartbeat Act, is temporarily blocked pending the Supreme Court's decision. Attorneys for abortion providers argued the privacy right in the state constitution is broad and previous case law protects bodily integrity in South Carolina, so they claim the 6-week ban violates the state constitution. Now, attorneys for the House Speaker, Senate President, State Attorney General, and Governor say the right is limited to search and seizure and was not intended to protect the right to an abortion. Now, the word abortion wasn't included in this provision in the Constitution.
It is perfectly clear that the state has consistently protected unborn life.
Despite the case being expedited, there is no timetable for when justices can make a decision.
But our decision will not be based on politics. It will not be based on cultural differences. It will be based purely on what the law, we believe the law says and requires in this instance.
Now, South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson was also in the courtroom Wednesday morning. He is optimistic in the state's arguments.
I feel like we stuck to the rule of law and the plenary authority, the General Assembly and the governor, the executive branch, to pass and sign laws into our legislation into law.
Now, attorneys for abortion providers say there is a lot at stake in this case beyond abortion.
I was struck this morning by how little comfort came from the state as to why, if it can ban abortion, why it cannot also ban birth control, why it cannot control women's lives in other ways.
Well, South Carolina's 6-week ban remains temporarily blocked. The state's 20-week ban enacted in 2016 is in effect. In Columbia, Jason Raven.
John, obviously a lot going on at the State House here, really kind of two separate issues in one. Can you kind of break down what we just heard about and what took place in Columbia this past week?
Okay, right. So again, a lot to unpack here.
Right.
You've got the 6-week heartbeat bill that the General Assembly passed and Governor signed last year. That's what the state Supreme Court right now is currently hearing. You also had activity in the state Senate this past Tuesday that dealt with the Senate's attempt to try to shore up the 6-week heartbeat bill to, again, just close some of the gaps that they called them that the legislature or the courts pointed out. That particular bill was different than the House version that came back over to the chamber. The Senate insisted on their version. They have now appointed a conference committee. Those two committees from the House and the Senate will meet, try to come up with a new version of the bill. Both chambers then have to reconvene, pass that version for it to go to the governor. This gets tricky because all this has to happen really by Election Day before the new 125th General Assembly is gaveled into session.
John, certainly a lot to unpack and to follow, and it's an issue that's really gotten a lot of traction in South Carolina. We had a chance to hear from Governor Henry McMaster and his challenger, Democrat Joe Cunningham, on this very issue. Here's what they both had to say.
What we are urging them to do is to take their time. If they produce a bill, it must be one that will be acceptable to the vast majority of people in the state.
Government can tell or say or do anything. And so we're putting a stop to it. And we're reminding folks that the only thing standing in the way full government control over women's bodies.
John, abortion is certainly a topic that these two are expected to talk about in their debate next week. Can we kind of preview that really quickly before we go?
Sure. So again, McMaster certainly is going to back up his previous position. Congressman Cunningham probably is going to take what is emerging as being a more mainstream Democratic position. We need to go back more to a Roe type law, which will prevent abortions in the exception of rape, incest, life of the mother, up until a certain period of time, which would be longer than the 6-week ban that Governor McMaster has proclaimed to support.
And John, they'll debate on SCE TV on Wednesday coming up, so certainly something you want to watch. We're going to also break it down on To The Point in the coming weeks as we head closer towards Election Day. Thank you so much for joining us on To The Point. We'll be back next week for the latest political news. Catch us every Sunday morning right here on News 2, starting at 11 a.m. Have a great weekend.